Welcome to SC Awards 2026. I'm Mike Shema. Joining me today is Michael Leland, VP and Field CTO at Island. Michael, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So one of the things we want to do is just get to know all of the SC Awards finalists, and Island browser, island.io, that I'm very familiar with them, but fill us in, a little bit for our audience. What should we know about you?
So about 5 years ago, we identified the fact that the majority of knowledge workers were using a browser to access business applications and data, but they were using a consumer browser to do it. And we know the attack surface of that is enormous. And so we've had to surround that tech with other tech. Some to protect the device on which the browser is running, some to backhaul the traffic to do break and inspect. And we decided, what if the browser was actually built for the enterprise, right? So we removed about 40% of the Chromium code, decided that we could replace it with enterprise-grade code. And for us, that started with the concept of enterprise trust. We tie directly into your IDP. So you authenticate into the browser, and through that, you get not only authentication, but you get authorization, application entitlement, and the first part of policy. Now, we built this concept of an application data boundary. So imagine that to be a secure enclave inside of which you define by policy which applications you trust. And by nature of what lives inside the boundary, you can control what data goes into it and what goes out of it. But customers kept asking us, we love what you're doing for us inside the browser. We were delivering data protection, zero trust network access. We were greatly improving performance and the end user experience. They said, this is great, but what about outside the browser? What about all our thick apps? And so what's interesting is, this week it's all about AI at the RSA show.
Yes.
AI, I don't want to say it came out of nowhere, but the way it did was very unique.
The explosion, yes.
But what's interesting about the way it happened is, for the most part, applications have been trying to move from the desktop to the cloud, right? The SaaSification of applications. Yeah. AI started as a SaaS application, right? Our interface to it was via, ChatGPT and Gemini, and but recently, very recently, it quickly moved to the desktop, right? Copilot, Gemini CLI, right? So for the first time, it was moving backwards. It was moving down to the desktop. And the important thing about why that happened is, in order for us to capture what user intent with AI looks like, you have to be at the place that they're utilizing it, right? Between me and my keyboard, between my keyboard and the file system. If you wait until that data leaves and has to be inspected in the cloud, it's too late to understand intent. AI takes place locally between me and a browser tab. And so the desktop component of what we built is so relevant now with AI more than it ever has been. It allows us to open up, phenomenal possibilities.
Yeah, and for me, there's an appeal that for the longest time, nobody needed root. They just needed to get into your browser, steal that cookie, do some cross-site scripting, some other attacks that happen in that browser, and the browser only had that same origin policy. It didn't have that enterprise grade security that you're describing. And what's interesting about the AI is that suddenly now, it, as you said, kind of repeating a bit, but it's also overprivileged when people are running it on their systems. Here's the OpenClaw, here's the MCP that just so happens to have everything. So how have you made it not quite have access to everything, or at least, yeah.
So believe it or not, it started 5 years ago when we forked the Chromium code base and decided to make it an enterprise class application, we have to harden it, right? We have to remove as much of the vulnerabilities as we can. We need to reduce the attack surface that it exposes. And so for the last 5 years, we keep improving the hardening capability of the browser. So that the underlying architecture of Chromium needed to be improved. That was our first step. The benefit of that work we've done over the last 5 years is that in the last 18 months of all the CVEs and 0 days that have been announced against Chromium, Island was immune to 80% of it, right? So
yeah, and the just getting rid of that code is the wonderful way to have a better attack surface, just reducing it. Because I wanted to ask, and I slightly cut you off because I was getting excited because there's also a ton of other AI agents and AI browsers out there, and everybody wants to rebuild their own browser, and they're a month, if they're lucky, if not 2 months behind all the CVEs that are coming out of that. So that's it appeals to me. I'm perking up hearing that you're staying ahead of the security. How does that work? And tell us a bit more about the AI browser aspect of this.
That's a great point. So we've seen the announcements of GPT Atlas and Comet, Comet from Dia. Remember though, they were built on top of the vanilla version of Chromium, so they didn't do anything to reduce the attack surface. All they've done is bolted on some cool AI widgets on top of it that give it access to the DOM, and now with things like Claude Code, access to your file system and everything else. But if you remember that concept of the application boundary, now that we can extend that application boundary to desktop applications, that includes things like Claude Code and terminal line access and things like that. So when you build your governance model and your policy for where these guardrails exist, you can say that if a certain user is not allowed to access specific information, maybe DLP policy says they can't access PII, that applies to both browser activity now and desktop activity if you need it to. Right?
Yeah, and that's suddenly becoming much more appealing story to CISOs, I imagine, that actually we can control this now in a reasonable way.
AI sprawl, right? This whole idea, we've been dealing with shadow IT for what, a decade or more?
Yeah,
right.
I was going to use that as my metaphor. Yeah,
steering
exactly.
users away from unsanctioned tools to sanctioned ones, but shadow AI became an even bigger problem, right? And so the first thing you need for that is visibility, right? You need to see all of the applications your users are using right now. Yeah. I had a customer tell me that we have 6 AI applications deployed. And we get in there and perform an inventory and get all the telemetry from usage. 243 AI applications, and that could be anything from a desktop application someone installed to an AI browser they've decided to download, from the web. Now it's things like skills that they're injecting into Claude Code, AI extensions. There's a phrase that somebody created. I can't take credit for it. It was called the malicious trinity, and it was the 3 most risky extensions that you can install. Password managers, VPNs, and AI led the pack. I like to add 2 more. I think ad blockers and anonymizers are probably also kind of no-nos. But of all the extensions published to the stores in the last 18 months, like 40% of them have something to do with AI. And our research, because we do a static evaluation of all of them, says that as many as 60% of those have either nefarious or unknown origins. So you don't know if you're installing something that's truly helping you get to ChatGPT, or if it's actually harvesting your prompts or installing a crypto miner.
Right. Or it was okay today, but by next Friday, it's been taken over, it's been compromised. There's the supply chain aspects as well.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to say, you rattled off a great list of things that people were downloading. And you didn't mention OpenClaw, but we could throw that on the list as well. But, downloading the AI browser, downloading the extensions. There's also a very persnickety, sneaky, I'm going to throw in a couple other synonyms here, way to just say, well, I'm using my ChatGPT, but this is the corp version, and here's my personal version, and oops, maybe I just made an accident. Not even talk about insider threat, just an accident. So how do you handle a shadow IT or shadow AI when it's just a tab?
So the 2 things that really help us there, the idea of an application boundary has to apply to not only which applications you trust, but those applications that offer both business and personal tenancies, right? You can't tell by looking at the URL, Gemini.google.com corporate and Gemini.google.com personal, but the data boundary can, right? We could identify the fact that you're inside of a personal tenant. The idea is we want to say yes to our end users as much as possible, because if you don't say yes, they find a way to go around, right?
Exactly.
So we can say yes, you're allowed to use AI, but when you try to go to an unsanctioned AI, we can steer you to the ones we want you to use. You'll have a different data policy when you are interacting with your business tenancy than your personal tenancy. Side-by-side tabs, I try to upload a business document into a business tab, fine. Try to upload it into a personal tenant, it can be blocked. But that concept of the boundary, and back to extensions for a minute, this is a really interesting one. The ability to say yes to extensions can have variability. So, for instance, Grammarly. Best example possible. For all intents and purposes, it's a keylogger, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It gets immediately denied on the first request from a security team.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what if you could say, yes, you can use Grammarly outside the data boundary, but I don't want Grammarly to have visibility to all my keystrokes that I type in my ERP tool or my EHR tool. So yes, you can, but I'm going to put guardrails around where and how you're allowed to use it.
I love that, because it's not saying don't, as you said, it's just saying, how hard should I make this, or how easy, I think is probably the better framing there for the end user.
I think an important part here too is, like, every release of feature product capability that we introduce, we always make sure it meets 3 key objectives. The first of which, it has to improve your cybersecurity posture, right? We have to drive better data protection, better access policies. Two, it has to drive out cost and complexity, right? And that comes through both control plane consolidation, vendor consolidation. But the third, and probably the most interesting one, is it has to improve the end user's experience.
You pay attention to UX.
So here's
this is
interesting.
rare.
I think that there are two end users for whom the experience needs to greatly improve. There's the knowledge worker sitting on this side of the glass that uses a browser every day to access applications. But people also forget about the admins, the ones that have to sit behind the policy, right? The user that the management console they have to log into. If you expect them to bounce back and forth between their ZTNA policy management console, their DLP policy management console, their SIM, their EDR, all of these things,
there's a mistake waiting to happen, I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the important thing here is for the admins, we also build that. But from a user perspective, it's not enough that you say yes, but, right? The whole say yes use case. It's important that you communicate properly at every step of the way why your policy decision is being enforced the way it is. Yes, you can go to AI, but we prefer you to use Copilot and not Grok.
Yeah.
Yes, we're going to let you print, but we're going to tell you these are the printers you're allowed to print to. Yes, you can save documents, but not to your local file system. We're going to let you save them into your corporate sanctioned file system. So the important thing is the messaging that you provide to your users has to be clean, concise, and consistent, but it has to be unique to the persona. Here's a great example. You might have a policy that says a contractor is allowed to access your AI resources when they're on your corporate network, but they pick that machine up and go to a Starbucks, and all of a sudden the policy has to change, and you need to be able to communicate to them. Your policy is now different because, right? We want to make sure we're not just saying yes here and no there. It's a no here and here's why. And maybe that's also when policy changes. So on-screen data redaction, it's a great example. If I ask a question and I get a piece of data back that contains PII, if I'm sitting inside the corporate network, maybe I'm perfectly fine seeing that information. But if I'm flying home from the RSA this week and I'm sitting side by side with somebody on a plane, I want to make sure that that data is not going to be shown to the person next to me. So it's a dynamic policy that takes into account your identity, your device posture, where you're coming from on a network, and then where you're coming from geographically.
And the user didn't have to click on anything, because you're describing this. I'm smiling because I'm thinking of the old days when, oh, this is the certificate is invalid. Click. Do you want to continue?
Yeah.
Okay, everybody just click continue anyway, but who cared? And that was no context, no grounds for doing something different, and people just wanted to go visit the website, right?
Exactly.
So this is, can we have a time machine and go fix those problems too?
I wish.
So a lot of this sounds like you're clearly paying attention to the customer. Are a lot of these coming out of customer conversations as well? Are they surprising you with new and different problems that they have?
So surprise is probably the wrong word. They're definitely impressing us with pushing us into areas that make sense. So if you look at the journey that we've been on, right? Browser first. That was our first core competency is build the enterprise class browser. And then of course the customers told us, but we still have our Chrome and Edge, so can you help us there? Sure. Here's an extension.
Okay.
Then they said, can you expand beyond the browser into our desktop? Sure. Here's one more piece, Island Desktop. They said, we don't like the cost and complexity of our VPNs, and we hate the end user experience of our ZTNA. Can you build us network access? So, okay, we did that. We still need remote browser isolation. Fine, that was an easy module for us. But then customers started asking for things that maybe we didn't understand originally why, but it makes perfect sense as an adjacency. Digital experience is one of those great examples. Mm-hmm. Digital end user experience is about tracking a user's perception of performance from their workspace.
Yes.
Right? Application performance monitoring.
The network is slow. What's going on?
Yeah. And so there's multiple areas where the performance could be impacted. It's not always the application team that needs to fix the problem. Sometimes it's the network team. Sometimes it's the end user compute team. So we started out with end user experience and digital experience as app performance. And then we quickly thought, we've got a background service that lives at the kernel level. So now we can track things like CPU utilization, memory utilization, Wi-Fi signal strength. And when you pair both sets of that telemetry together, a help desk operator who's trying to figure out what root cause is for a performance problem is not just kicking that over to the app team. They're able to look in and say, you know what, Heidi needs to move closer to the Wi-Fi hotspot. Like that's the reason that she's having a performance problem.
I mean, we can skip over. Have you tried turning it on, off and on again? That sounds.
The next thing they asked for, and we quickly responded, is we need remote support. Right? You're on the phone with IT, and they're like, "I need to see what your computer looks like right now. Share your screen." So that's a feature that's coming in the next couple of months as well. Is remote support.
That's amazing.
You're familiar with OS Query, right? We are adding OS, like enterprise grade OS Query to it. So the evolution of the product is just kind of taking us in many different directions. One thing I'm most proud of, though, the velocity of innovation at this company has been stellar. When a customer asks us for a feature, right, we track the FRs when they were submitted, summarized, prioritized. Our average turnaround is about 28 days to get a new feature in an early access version.
Okay.
It's never been that fast in any other vendor I've worked for. It's been crazy.
Someone paying attention to metrics gives me just more confidence that talking about observability, you know what you're talking about. I appreciate that. Michael, thank you so much for talking about this today.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
If you'd like to learn more about Island, please visit securityweekly.com/IslandRSAC. And for all of our coverage from SC Awards 2026, check out securityweekly.com/RSAC. Thanks for watching.